What's up everybody, this is Mastery and Gamer. Lately, I've been hearing a lot of people talk about the necessity to fix competitive mode. Specifically, one of the big ideas I hear mentioned a lot is the idea of a role selection. If you are unfamiliar with this idea, it's a feature where players choose their roles, for example, tank, support, or DPS, and then the Overwatch Competitive matchmaker takes note of these selections so that it can form balanced teams. In principle, this is a great idea. How often do you get stuck being paired with 5 other DPS mains, meaning that you are doomed to defeat simply because none of you can play tank or healer very well? With this feature in the game, you can be paired with others who will work well with you as a team, and thus increase your chances of not only winning, but also just having a good, enjoyable game overall. However, in this video, I'm going to explain why I'm strongly opposed to the idea of a role selection, as well as why I think Blizzard would never actually put it into the game. So first off, it would force certain metas. If the game is looking to pick people of specific roles in order to balance a team, then that means there must be a predetermined general team composition in mind. The specific heroes may not be set in stone, but the general roles they must occupy would have to be. So how is this composition determined? Would it go for something simple like the 2-2-2 where you have 2 DPS, 2 tanks, and 2 support? Or would it prioritize a tanky comp where you can have 3 or 4 tanks? Or maybe even a dive comp where you have 3 or 4 DPS? Regardless, it's going to have to force you into one team composition or another, which then would horribly limit the team possibilities that you could play. Maybe you don't want to fit into something meta, and want to play a team of 6 tanks. Sure, you'll almost certainly lose with this composition, but you should still hold the right to be able to make that decision. Now, I can see how people would have an issue with what I just said, on the grounds that if 5 team members want to do this, and the 6th one doesn't, then how is that fair towards the 6th member? Well, in short, it's not. But that just brings to question almost a political debate of whether we should have the right to make poor decisions or not, even up to the impacts it has on others. Personally, I think in Overwatch, players should have the right to make whatever decisions they want with regards to team composition, even though it has its risks. It's the same reason competitive doesn't have a hero ban system. It takes away from the fun and freedom of being able to play the game how you want, thus ruining the experience for many people, myself included. Now, if you wanted to continue to fight this position, I expect your next rebuttal would be to bring up the 1 hero limit, which has been around for the majority of Overwatch's life. However, I think there's an important difference between not being able to play 6 Hanzos and not being able to play 6 DPS. Not only is it simpler to balance the game when you don't have to worry about stacking up on multiples of the same hero, but also it encourages what I consider positive diversity. Sure, you can't have 2 Soldier 76s, which might conflict with your desired team build, but instead of the 2nd Soldier, you must be clever with deciding who to pick. Could a McCree fill the role ideally enough? Or perhaps someone else would serve as a better substitute? The point being here is that while the 1 hero limit does technically restrict Overwatch's gameplay, I'm sure many of you agree that it does this in a way that's much more reasonable than forcing specific roles to be filled. While role select forces what you can and can't play, the hero limit only forces what you can't, and to a much milder degree. So hopefully I've made it clear why I stand for one and not the other. Anyways, focusing back on the role select specifics, an alternative I've heard brought up is that the role select wouldn't be forced, but rather would work as a sort of soft suggestion. Every player picks which role they want to fill, or perhaps even a couple roles, and then the matchmaker puts people together who fit into some generalized, balanced team comp. But, after being paired in this way, the players aren't forced to pick heroes from their specific roles, and thus any team composition would still be possible, in addition to ensuring people are grouped together with complementary players. Personally, I think this idea is even worse. If this system were to be put into place, then it's implicit that it would need multiple queues for all the people who selected different roles to fill. And here's a wild guess, but I can't help but suspect the queues for DPS will be much longer than those for tank and support. Now, I think most, if not all of you who are watching this video, play Overwatch for yourselves. And if you do, you're probably aware that there are a number of assholes who play this game. And so, tell me, what happens when an asshole DPS main decides he just wants to get into a game as quickly as possible, and so decides to queue as a support instead? He then quickly gets into a game, and before anyone else gets a chance, picks Genji. And then to top it all off, it turns out that the other 3 tank and support players on the team did the exact same thing. Now, we once again have a team made up of completely incompatible players. The point of this isn't to bash on DPS mains, who by no means are all selfish assholes, but rather it's to point out the inevitability of people abusing this kind of soft system to the point that it might as well not even exist. It's just like the recently removed Rate Match button, which used to show up at the end of every match. Its purpose was to evaluate the enjoyment of any given game, but mostly it was just used to express satisfaction with winning and discontent with losing. While put in with good intentions, it ultimately proves to be worthless in the scope of what it was trying to do. So moving past any sort of manually selected hero roles on the player's end, another similar idea I've heard is that the matchmaker should take into account your hero playtime in order to put together people who could form a balanced team. While I think this is a more reasonable idea, it still seems to have too many potential flaws. For example, just because you've spent the most time playing support heroes like Mercy and Lucio, doesn't mean you won't ever want to play a DPS or tank in competitive. In fact, what if you're quite good at DPS, but play mostly support because you generally enjoy it more? Then, the role you're weaker at skill-wise will be prioritized over the role you can play best. Simply put, using some kind of below-the-surface player skill tracker could just get way too complicated. What if you have 800 hours on Mercy, but then switch to being a McCree main? You now have 200 hours on McCree and can play him really well, but the system will continue to consider you a Mercy main just because you have 4 times as much time put in on her than you do on McCree. Overall, there are just too many variables to reasonably be taken into account. And furthermore, the only thing it can really guarantee to do is pigeonhole players and restrict the freedom of them being able to play different things. I don't think it's surprising at all that Blizzard hasn't implemented something like this, as I don't think it can really be done properly. I've so far talked about the big ideas and their issues, but there are still more smaller ones that would have to be worked around. Like, how would this affect queue times? Is the time it takes to quote-unquote better form teams really worth it? Also, what defines the role a hero gets placed under? Are offense and defense just all lumped into DPS? What about Symmetra? While in the support category, isn't she technically closer to being a damage dealer? Can we really rely on just the 3 DPS, tank, and support classes to be good enough to form a balanced team? While I won't say it's impossible to come up with some sort of role selection system that works, I certainly think it's very unlikely. While I'm sure competitive mode could stand to be fixed in some ways or others, I don't think this is the solution we want or need. I wish I could offer some better alternatives to follow up the negative things I've said about the role selection feature, but I'm really not too sure what the best answer is. Honestly, I personally don't play enough competitive to really have a solid, definite stance on what exactly needs to be fixed and how. But I do have one suggestion, and that's to form your own 6-stack team. Now, I know many people can't do this because they don't know enough people or whatever. Believe me, I can relate. But honestly, it would alleviate many of these problems that get brought up. Find people who complement the heroes you can play well, and then make them your friends. Form a regular group to play with if you want to take competitive that seriously, as I think it will solve many of your problems. Don't rely on the matchmaker to do all the work for you. If you really want to raise your odds, then get out there and find some people yourself. Heck, you don't even need a whole 6-stack. Just having 1 or 2 others can drastically increase your odds of having a good team. I don't mean to be so harsh about it, but I really think it's what a lot of concerned people should be focusing on, especially if you're playing at a higher level, which I think is the majority of people who are looking for a solution. But hey, these have just been my thoughts. Now, I want to hear from you. Please comment below with your own thoughts about the possibility of a role selection feature, and whether or not you think it could ever work in Overwatch. Also, don't forget to cast your vote regarding it in today's poll card. Thank you all for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, then please hit that like button. Also, be sure to subscribe, follow me on Twitter, and click that bell icon to keep up with all my future content. This is Mastery and Gamer, signing off, and until next time, keep thinking about how to improve Overwatch, and have a great day.